So, what we know already is that coaching is a conversation where someone feels heard and where they know something at the end that they didn't know at the beginning. So, the question is, what do we need to do in order for that to be true? I guess that another definition of coaching is keeping someone company while they think. So, there's a number of things that we know make for a really cracking conversation. And the first one is the contract. It's creating that container which is going to give an edge to the conversation that's going to make transformation possible. And the contract is about saying, what are we doing here today in this conversation? How are we going to do it? And how are we going to know that we've done it? And that's all. That's absolutely all we need to do. So that container comes from some really short questions at the beginning that the ICF actually define as mastery and coaching. And we've just made them into a little word to make it a bit easier. So the Stoker's questions. So the first question is subject. What are we going to think about today? The second question, the time question, is in the time we have, which bit of that do we need to think about today? Outcome, what do you want to be different by the end of this conversation? So you'll notice that all of these are implying that actually something is going to change, which is what we really want to happen. So K, how are you going to know that this has been useful? Role is how we're going to do that, and where should we start? All of that creates a container which allows us to have much more potential for transformation in the conversation. So some of the principles that we know work really well is that every single time we don't know what to do, we ask our colleague, which of course is totally upside down to what we know in the rest of our normal life. But it's going to make a significant difference. So at the beginning of the conversation, we've no idea what we're going to do. So ask them. And every time we get stuck, ask them, what do we need to do now? And it takes quite a lot of energy and behavior change to move from that thing where you go, I don't know what to do next, to go, so what should we do now? But ask them is a real fundamental. The next fundamental is about noticing and not diagnosing. So we know, we completely get that listening is one of the fundamentals of a coaching conversation. And the skill is to listen with our eyes and to listen to the real raw data, not to interpret it. So noticing is about words, it's about what isn't said, it's about what we see. And one of the things that we're learning massively, which we just talked about, is the idea that where we notice a lot from looking at the face. So really notice somebody's progress through thinking. And that will make a really significant difference. So notice, don't diagnose. There are always some tangents that come up in the conversation. So whatever the container is that we have created, there are going to be some other things that come in. So one is all the stuff from the system, society, organization, group, or individual. So that's an interesting thing to observe. Are they talking purely at the individual level? Are they talking about their group or team, their organization, society, their clients, their patients, their whoever? That tangent's also about what we see, which might take us off the contract. There's something about changing hats. Sometimes it might feel as though we need to be in a different role from coaching, and sometimes there's just a massive tangent. And the skill in all of those situations is to ask. You know, it sounds like we were having a coaching conversation. You're spending a lot of time asking me what I think you should do. Is that a mentoring question? What do we need to do about it? So that's useful. So change those hats with consent. And I would say as late as possible, because the container that we use in the coaching context can be used in any context, in supervision, in mentoring, in managing. But the skill is to get, well, number one, to get them to do as much of the work as possible. But also, if they do want data in, we need to be really clear together what their question is before we put it in, and then change hats with consent. So ask before we swap hats is really important. Showing the working out. So that's about the process. what we often do is we make leaps in conversations where we move from noticing one thing, noticing another thing, and then just translating a question to kind of go for a hypothesis. And the more simple and straightforward we can be about the process and transparent, the more effective we can be. So show the working out says, you came to the conversation and you wanted to talk about this. It's very interesting because we've spent the last 10 minutes talking about that. What do you want to do? Rather than quite subtly, suddenly kind of just changing direction without saying what we're doing. So show the working out is really important. Don't talk to the wavy people. So if you remember, when we have conversations with people, they have really, really interesting stuff going on behind them. And one of the things that we really need to focus on is having a conversation with the person who is in the room or on the phone with us, and not asking questions or interrogating their story. So when we find ourselves saying, so tell me more about that, your manager, or actually that question that you mentioned, you know, what have you done already? That's interrogating stuff that's behind them. The only thing in our gift in any conversation is the conversation that you or I are having with this other person who's with us. And we need to speak to them and to honour that and not talk to their story. Because as soon as we start talking to their story, what we're actually doing is we're implying that we're the expert and that we need lots and lots of data in order to fix or diagnose or whatever. So don't talk to the wavy people. Do it now. So one of the interesting things is how many times in conversations we have a conversation about a conversation. And the do it now principle says, instead of talking about something, let's just do it. So that's a great example of the real play, where you say, why don't you just stand up and try out that conversation now? So we use that catapletic hand, put the hand out, say, just say it, say what you're going to say. You are not role playing, so you are not going to act the part and come back as your colleagues, whatever it is they're talking about. All you're doing is giving them a space in which to have that conversation. And it's useful often to just turn up the gas and say, shall we try that in a more challenging way? Or turn it down, should we try it in a less challenging way? And remember, when you're doing it now, it's very difficult to change the tone or the pace or the content of a conversation if you are standing or sitting in the place that you were standing or sitting where you tried it and you didn't like it. So get them to move between each iteration. So that's do it now. Asking questions from a different place. Einstein, I think it was, says it's very difficult to solve a problem in the frame in which we created it. So asking questions from a different place means that we could ask questions from the systemic place of, so if the patient or the volunteer or that customer was in the room, what would they be saying? But that's about bringing them into the room. If you go to the future and you look back, what do you see? That's a different place. I notice that you're talking all in facts. What are the feelings? That's a different place. So you've got a number of different options to ask questions from a different place. But that's what's going to shift the thinking, asking questions from a different place. Then we've got keep out of the way. You know, we really, really want the person that we're talking to do as much of the work as possible. And that means that we need to watch and wait and listen and really learn not to interrupt their thinking. It's interesting to notice, I think, how much time it takes to learn to notice whether somebody's thinking. And because we're so expert at not interrupting people's talking, usually, most of us, but we're pretty skilled at interrupting thinking. So really focus on how do you know somebody's thinking? And if you don't know, ask them. But while they're thinking, don't speak. So as people grow and advance in working in this way, one of the real skills that you notice is increasing presence and people's ability and confidence as the coach to bravely wait while their thinker is doing what they need to do. And that might mean that they're having a completely other conversation inside as well as the one that we're having. And then the skill is just to say, you know, did something just change on the inside? Where are we now? Not what just happened there, because that would require them to report back to us, and we're not their manager. Keep the responsibility in the middle. If you remember the ball of responsibility, we share responsibility for the whole process. So I don't take the ball of responsibility and run with my agenda. Neither do I dump it on you. We share responsibility all the way through. And it's not my responsibility to solve your stuff, thank goodness. But it is our responsibility to do what we need to do in order to help you think in a new way as you kind of grow in your professional and personal capability, confidence, engagement. Match for rapport and mismatch for change. This is the whole thing about how most of us have learnt to match for rapport, to build rapport. And we do that by matching body language, by matching position and tone and pace, and how hugely valuable that is, except when it isn't. So the person who comes to you and narrates something like, I'm stuck, I'm really stuck, I'm very stuck. So the matching response would be, so you're stuck, you're really stuck. And of course that ends up in them going, yeah, I am, I'm really stuck. And then we go in a rapport way, that must be really difficult for you. And actually what we're doing is we are compounding their stuckness. I mean, that can show up in lots of different ways. But mismatching for change is about changing pace or tone or position. So an example in that one, so the person comes in and goes, I'm stuck. I'm very, very stuck. The mismatch goes, that sounds quite tricky. So we've got some time here today together. What is it that we need to do that can help you to move that forward? And that might be body position changing. That might be tone changing. It could be all sorts of things. But that's going to help them, support them to move forward. So match for rapport and mismatch for change. Be silent and ask questions where necessary. You know, all of us, I think, are really hoping and exploring the concept of asking really powerful and great questions. And yet what we forget is if a question is really great, it could last quite a long time. And we don't need to have another one stacking up on the back of it. So drop in those questions one at a time and then be silent and let them do their thing. We for process, you for action. So I guess this links back to keeping responsibility in the middle. And it's something about, as we develop in coaching, being really, really robust, that we is the language that we use between us here and now in the conversation that we're having, and that we only use you when it comes to actions that you're going to take away. What this does is it massively increases presence and the feeling of support in the room. Well, that's not it's not made up either, it's real. It's very supportive in the room. So we for process, what we're doing here together today, and you for action, which means that all those process questions, where are we now? What do we need to do next? Need to have the we word in the conversation, or the person that we're talking to suddenly gets super isolated. This is the principle on which the ICF and I have a slight disagreement, but I honestly think that if you watch people having conversations, we doesn't mean that I'm getting into your stuff. It just means that this is about what we're doing here in the process today. So we for process, you for action. Change the medium. That goes back, I guess, to the asking questions from a different place. We've got all sorts of things at our fingertips that aren't just words. You know, words are overrated and actually slow things down often. So changing the medium at our fingertips, we've got the potential to give somebody a paper and pen so they can draw or write. Interestingly, Jackie Holder talks about getting people to do a 3-minute write as a kind of reflection catch up. And she talks about doing that even in the middle of a coaching conversation. So just push the paper across and say, or particularly useful for people who bring a notebook, would it be useful if you just wrote for 3 minutes, and then we'll see what we need to do next. So change the medium. You've got pens, you've got objects. I know we train using buttons, but if I look at my desk now, I can see paper clips or pens, coffee mugs. There are lots of things that we can do to look together at the situation from a different place by changing the medium. And then you've also got the really powerful one, which is about standing up, walking, moving, using mats in order to enable our person really to get new awareness, which is one of the core competencies of the ICF, which is to look at it in a totally and absolutely different way. So change the medium is very, very powerful. When it's over, it's over. Let's not think we have to fill all the time. But actually, really interestingly, we are beginning to learn, I think, that first of all, that closing question, have we finished, is really important, because it's the only way that we are closing down that lozenge in a respectful way. And if I say to you, have we finished, you're probably going to either go, yeah, but most people will go, yeah. And in that case, you can say, so we've got a couple of minutes left. What do we need to do so that we have finished? And if we finish well, and then we can do whatever that is, because they'll tell us. But if we finish well like that and close down that last triangle of the lozenge, what happens is the person will continue to think after the conversation is over. And that's often where the most value comes and the most learning comes and the most insight comes. But what happens when we go, so we're out of time, we need to finish, is we've just cut it off. And that's when they almost stop thinking, and then they wait to come back to us next week or next month. So to honour their thinking process, ending well is really, really important. So in that closing down bit, over time, some of the things that we want to know is, have we completed the contract? So when we started, we were trying to think about this. Where are we on that? Is this useful? Accountability. Do you need to be accountable to anybody? They may not. What are you learning? Have we finished? So when it's over, it's over. And then just a little reminder of the fact that people talk in the story that people tell goes all over the place. And when we're listening, really think about listening for those headlines, those themes, and that underbelly is going to make a huge and significant difference to the way that you listen. It's also less tiring and more effective for them. So that's listening. So I hope that's been useful.